Everyone at Hollowick University knew about Danny Moran, not because he was loud about it, he never was. Not because he advertised it in that particular peacocking way some alphas did, rolling their shoulders back like they owned the air in the room. Danny Moran was quiet about what he was. He just existed, and the world rearranged itself accordingly. 6 feet of lean, unhurried confidence with dark hair that was always slightly too long and green eyes that looked permanently amused by a joke no one else had heard. He moved through campus the way water moves through a riverbed, without effort, without announcement, wearing the same beaten leather jacket in October that he'd probably worn in July. His scent was cedar and cold stone and something metallic that made every omega in a 3-block radius turn their head on instinct. The thing was, Danny never noticed. He'd been tested twice at the university clinic. Both times the result came back the same: alpha, high designation, pheromone output in the 93rd percentile. And yet, Danny Moran could not smell a single omega pheromone, not one. Not even standing directly next to a presenting omega in full heat, which had happened once in the university library during his sophomore year when he'd been close enough to count another student's eyelashes. He'd handed her a bottle of water, asked if she needed the campus health line, and gone back to his paper on Victorian land reform. The doctor had explained it carefully. Selective anosmia, she'd called it. Neurologically, Danny was perfectly capable of detecting scent. He could smell coffee from 2 rooms away, could identify pine from oak on a hiking trail. His brain simply processed omega pheromones as neutral atmosphere. Background static. Silence, which meant Danny Moran, one of the highest designation alphas on campus, had spent 23 years utterly indifferent to the one thing that was supposed to define his biology. "You're like a bee that can't smell flowers," Marcus had said once, over terrible dining hall coffee. "Thank you for that image," Danny had replied. "You're welcome. I've been workshopping it." The truth was, Danny didn't think about it much. He had a thesis to write on post-war economic restructuring, a part-time job at the campus bookstore, and a habit of running 5 miles before sunrise. He was not, by his own assessment, missing anything. He was wrong about that. He just didn't know it yet. The coffee shop was called Grounds for something, either a very clever double meaning or an unfortunate grammatical accident. It sat on the corner of Birch and Aldermast, 3 blocks from the university's east gate, with exposed brick and mismatched wooden chairs and a chalkboard menu with handwriting so ornate it was barely readable. Danny went there on a Thursday in late October because the bookstore's espresso machine had finally given up and the library cafe was out of oat milk. He pushed through the glass door with his shoulder, hands full of research files, and got in line. The shop was moderately full. He looked at his phone while he waited, checked the email from his thesis advisor, frowned at a notification from his bank, looked up. The person behind the counter was new. That was the first thing Danny noticed. Not anything else. Just that he hadn't seen this particular face before in his 2 years of occasional patronage at Grounds for Something, and his brain filed it as new data the way brains do, efficiently and without ceremony. Then he kept looking, and something much less efficient started happening somewhere in his chest. The new barista was shorter than Danny by several inches, slight in build, with blonde hair that had started the morning in careful order and since fully abandoned the attempt, curling at the nape of his neck and over his forehead in a way that managed to look both accidental and devastating. Dark green apron over a white shirt with sleeves pushed to the elbows, and he was currently engaged in a very serious discussion with the person at the front of the line about the difference between a cortado and a macchiato. "They're technically different drinks," the barista was saying, with the patient energy of someone who had explained this many times and found it no less interesting for the repetition. "A cortado is equal parts espresso and steamed milk. A macchiato is espresso with just a small mark of foam on top. The names cortado is from the Spanish for cut, macchiato is Italian for stained. The milk cuts the espresso, or stains it, depending on which way you look at it." The customer considered this. Which one is less pretentious to order? The barista's mouth curved. Honestly, both are pretentious. Order what you like. The customer laughed, paid, stepped aside. Danny moved forward in the line. He had his order ready. He always had his order ready. He was not a person who held up lines, but he found himself moving more slowly than usual. Something about the quality of the light in here, maybe. The way the morning sun was coming through the front window at an angle that turned everything amber. The next person ordered. The barista made the drink with the focused efficiency of someone who had trained their hands to do the thing while their mind stayed free. He was humming something under his breath, too quiet to identify, just a low, contented sound, like a person who was genuinely, uncomplainingly happy to be where they were. There was a small smudge of what looked like espresso grounds on his left wrist. His eyes were, when he glanced up briefly to confirm the order, a warm, specific shade of brown that Danny's brain immediately cataloged and filed somewhere much more prominent than it should have. One more person ahead. Danny had been looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. The second-to-last customer left. Danny stepped to the counter. Up close, the barista was... The word that came to mind was luminous, which was not a word Danny generally deployed about people, or much of anything, and yet here it was arriving uninvited. There were faint shadows under the brown eyes that suggested the early shift had started very early indeed, and still, they were warm, alert. The kind of eyes that looked at things with genuine interest, as if everything was worth looking at. "Hi," the barista said. "What can I get you?" "Large black coffee," Danny said, and then, for reasons he could not fully account for, he added, "And I think I need to know whether you prefer stained or cut." The barista blinked. Then, his mouth did the thing again. That particular curve that was not quite a smile yet, but was clearly the thing a smile came from. "Excuse me?" "The milk. The espresso. Which metaphor do you prefer?" A pause. Then, "Cut," the barista said, with the quiet certainty of someone who had thought about this before, or at least was thinking about it now in real time with impressive speed. Cut implies the milk does something active. It's doing work. It's changing the nature of the thing. Staining sounds passive, accidental. But staining is permanent, Danny said. Cutting just means something passed through. The barista looked at him. It was a very particular look, the kind that comes from someone calibrating whether a stranger is being genuinely philosophical or merely performative about being philosophical. Whatever the assessment was, it apparently came out in Danny's favor, because the curve deepened. "Large black coffee," the barista repeated, reaching for a cup. "Name? Danny. Billy." Not an offering of information in the usual transactional way. More like an exchange. Like the name was a small thing being handed over deliberately. Billy Tucker, Danny would learn later, from the employee roster on the small corkboard by the back counter that he found himself reading while he waited for his drink. Billy Tucker, who worked the Thursday and Friday morning shifts. Billy Tucker, who made his coffee and slid it across the counter and met his eyes with a directness that most people reserved for conversations they'd already been having for years. "For what it's worth," Billy said, "I think something can be both permanent and changing." Danny picked up his cup. Their fingers were close enough that he felt the warmth of Billy's hand without touching it. "Yeah," he said, "I think you're right." He went to the corner table by the window. He opened his research files. He did not read them for 20 minutes. He went back Friday. He told himself it was convenient. Birch and Aldermast was on the way to the library from his apartment if he took a slightly longer route, which he now apparently took. He ordered the same coffee. Billy was there. "Large black," Billy said before Danny reached the counter, and Danny felt something embarrassing move through his chest at being remembered. "Good memory." "You made an impression," Billy said simply, and then turned to make the coffee with that same focused efficiency, and Danny had approximately 15 seconds to decide what to do with that sentence, which turned out to be nothing useful. He sat at the corner table again, opened his files again. This time he managed to read them, though he was aware of Billy in his peripheral vision in a way he was not used to being aware of other people, not intrusively, not uncomfortably, just constantly. Like having a window open in winter and being perpetually, pleasantly aware of cold air. Around 9:30, the rush died down and Billy came out from behind the counter to collect cups and white tables. When he got to Danny's corner, he didn't rush. "Thesis?" he asked, nodding at the spread of papers. "Post-war economic restructuring in Western Europe. You?" "Music composition. Second year." He stacked cups with the casual competence of someone who'd done this enough times to do it without thinking. "The economic stuff sounds like something that should be dry, but isn't." "Most things that should be dry aren't," Danny said, "if you look at them right." Billy looked at him again in that calibrating way. "What's your angle on it?" "Marshall Plan is a form of psychological architecture. Not just rebuilding economies, rebuilding the way people thought about what an economy could be. The material conditions and the ideological ones were inseparable." "Huh." Billy leaned against the windowsill, arms crossed, considering. He had a small habit Danny was already noticing. When he was thinking, his head tilted very slightly to the left, like a bird listening. "So it's about narrative, as much as policy." "Exactly. The policy was the narrative. You can't separate them." "Music is like that too," Billy said. "You can analyze the notes separately from the emotional effect, but eventually you have to admit they're the same thing." Danny wanted to ask him to elaborate. He had the distinct and slightly alarming sense that he could listen to Billy Tucker talk about music composition for a very long time and not get tired of it. "What are you working on?" he asked. "String quartet. It's supposed to be about grief, but it keeps wanting to be about something else." "What does it want to be about?" "I haven't figured out yet." The corner of his mouth lifted. "I'll let you know when it tells me." The bell above the door chimed with incoming customers, and Billy straightened, collected the last cup, went back behind the counter. Danny watched him go, then turned back to his papers, then watched him go a second time, then told himself firmly to stop it. He stayed until 11. He went back the following Thursday. By the third week, it had become a routine so settled that Danny stopped noticing he'd built it. He arrived between 8 and 8:15. Billy had his coffee ready, or nearly so. Some days they talked for 5 minutes. Some days, the only exchange was the coffee and a look that managed to contain the same warmth as a full conversation. Some days, if the after-rush lull was long enough, Billy would come sit across from him at the corner table and they would talk until the next wave of customers arrived. Danny learned things in accumulating small pieces, the way you learn about a landscape by walking through it rather than studying a map. Billy Tucker was from a small town 3 hours north. He'd been playing piano since 6, violin since 10, and had arrived on a music scholarship with a specific obsession with contemporary classical composition his high school teacher had nurtured with the devotion of someone who recognized something rare. He liked dark chocolate and hated milk chocolate with a specificity that Danny found disproportionately endearing. He had strong opinions about historical architecture. He read constantly, mostly nonfiction, history, and philosophy, and left annotated sticky notes in library books he always felt faintly guilty about afterward. He was an Omega, which Danny knew from the soft blue registration pin on his apron strap. It registered as information, the way it always did. Nothing more. Except. Danny had been trying to be honest with himself, in the quiet of his apartment at night, with the particular discomfort of a person who is usually good at self-knowledge, discovering an unfamiliar gap in it. Something was happening that had nothing to do with pheromones, and everything to do with the person themselves. The tilt of the head, the specificity of opinions, the way Billy's voice went when he talked about something he loved, the way he'd said cut, not stained, with quiet certainty. The espresso ground smudge that showed up in different places every Thursday. The way when Danny made a joke, Billy laughed with his whole face. This felt like discovery. Like finding a door in a house you'd lived in for years. He didn't say anything about it. He wasn't sure what he would say. The piece of the picture Danny was missing arrived on a Wednesday, his thesis day, spent at the library instead of the coffee shop. He was coming back through the east gate at dusk when he nearly walked into Marcus. "You've been weird for 3 weeks, Marcus said, not a question. Marcus didn't do questions. He delivered observations and let you arrange them. Danny kept walking. Marcus fell into step beside him. I'm focused. There's a difference. You smiled at your phone this morning at breakfast and then looked embarrassed about it. They walked half a block. Fine, Danny said. There's a barista. At the place on Birch? Marcus sounded entirely pleased with himself. You've mentioned it approximately 11 times without seeming to notice. What's the barista like? Danny considered. Smart, specific, has opinions about things that most people don't think carefully about. Funny, but quietly, he doesn't perform it. A pause. He's writing a string quartet about grief that wants to be about something else. Danny, that's the most you've said about a person who isn't a historical figure in your entire life. That's an exaggeration. It really isn't. What's the problem? I don't want to be impulsive. I'm aware of what I'm supposed to want and why I'm supposed to want it. I want to be sure that what I actually feel isn't contaminated by that. Marcus stopped walking. Danny went 2 more steps, then stopped too. That's the most overthought version of a crush I've ever heard, Marcus said. But also, that's kind of extraordinary that you think that way. Don't make it weird. It's been weird since you smiled at your phone. Marcus started walking again. Just talk to him, as a person, which you're apparently already doing. Yeah, Danny said. Okay. November arrived with the particular attitude of a season that knew exactly what it was doing. The trees on campus went from gold to bare in what felt like a single week. The heating in Danny's apartment made a noise at 3 in the morning that was either the pipes or something philosophical, and he'd stopped trying to determine which. He went to grounds for something on Thursday as usual. The shop was quieter than it had been in weeks. The cold had driven most people to the library or to their rooms, and the usual line was thin. Billy was behind the counter, but instead of the focused efficiency of a busy morning, he had the slower energy of someone who'd had time to breathe. And he was wiping down the espresso machine with one hand and reading something propped up against the syrup bottles with the other. Danny got his coffee, sat down. 15 minutes later, Billy came and sat across from him. What are you reading? Danny asked. Billy turned the book around so Danny could see the cover. Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception. Danny looked at it, then at Billy. For a music composition student, he said. The chapter on the body as subject rather than object. Billy set the book down. My professor assigned it as supplemental reading for the seminar on embodied composition. The idea that music is understood through the body that hears it, not just the mind. But I ended up reading the whole thing because... He paused. He has this section about the relationship between perception and understanding, how we can know something bodily before we know it consciously. The felt sense, Danny said. Billy looked up. You've read this? Philosophy minor. Undergraduate. A pause. The idea that the body comprehends things the mind hasn't articulated yet. Right. Something in Billy's expression shifted, not surprise exactly, more like a door opening. I've been thinking about it in terms of the quartet. The grief section keeps wanting to expand into something that isn't resolution exactly, but isn't unresolved either, an in-between state. And I think the reason I've been stuck is that I've been trying to notate what it is before I've let myself feel what it is. Danny set his pen down. What does it feel like? Billy was quiet for a moment. His hands rested flat on the table. Outside, the wind picked up and a scattering of leaves hit the window. Like being inside a moment, he said slowly. Like the moment is so complete that you stop being able to tell whether you're in the middle of it or already past it. And the music wants to capture that ambiguity without resolving it, because resolving it would lie about what it actually is. Danny looked at him across the table. The morning light had gone gray with cloud cover, and the lamp in the corner of the shop had come on, and Billy in that lamplight was the most entirely real thing Danny could remember being in a room with. The Marshall Plan documentation has letters, he said, from the architects of the plan, writing to each other about what they were building, and there's this quality in the language. They're describing an enormous thing, historically enormous, and yet they write about it in these careful, almost tentative terms, as if they knew the moment was too big to claim directly. He paused, like they were inside it, like they could feel it without being able to name it yet. Billy was watching him with an expression Danny couldn't fully catalog, something steady and open. "That's exactly it," he said. "That's exactly the texture of it." They stayed for almost 2 hours that morning. When the rush picked back up and Billy had to go back behind the counter, he looked back once from halfway across the shop, not with the particular calculated nature of a look that means something, just with the easy, unguarded quality of someone who looked because they wanted to. Danny felt it like a physical thing, a warmth that settled somewhere under his sternum and stayed there all day. He was not going to be overthought about this. He was going to be honest about it, with himself first, then with Billy. He was what, exactly? He turned the word over, the way he turned over primary source documents, looking for the right thing underneath. He was falling for Billy Tucker, not because of what Billy was, biologically, not because of any invisible signal his body was or wasn't reading, because Billy thought the milk cut the espresso and not just stained it, and because he was writing music that lived in the in-between, and because he read phenomenology supplementally on slow Thursday mornings and then talked about it with his hands flat on the table and his eyes completely present. That was specific enough to trust. He almost said something the following Thursday. A simple question. "Do you want to get dinner sometime?" 5 words. He wrote 10,000-word thesis drafts without flinching. 5 words should be manageable. And then Billy leaned across the counter to hand him his coffee and said, "I'm glad you keep coming here," with a quiet directness that completely demolished whatever carefully calibrated plan Danny had assembled. "What?" Danny said, which was not 5 words but was all he had. "I'm glad you keep coming here. It's been a good few weeks, talking with you." Danny stood at the counter and felt the full absurdity of being a 93rd percentile alpha who had been outsmarted by a smaller person in a green apron. "Yeah," he managed. "Same." Before 5 words could escape him, a group of undergraduates arrived, and the moment sealed itself shut. "Marcus," he texted from his corner table, "abort mission. Mortifying." "What happened?" Marcus replied almost immediately. "He said he was glad I kept coming back, and I said, yeah. Same." A long pause. Then, "Danny, you know that's basically a confession, right? From both of you." He looked up. Billy was at the far end of the counter, completely focused, the blonde hair losing its order around the edges. He laughed at something a customer said, and the sound of it reached across the shop. Brief, warm, entirely unperformed. Danny put his phone face down, picked up his pen. He would figure out the 5 words. He had a week. He figured them out in 4 days. It happened on a Sunday, which was not a coffee shop day. Billy didn't work Sundays. Danny had established this without directly asking, which Marcus had identified as its own kind of statement. Danny was at his kitchen table with a draft chapter spread across it, red pen in hand, doing the kind of structural editing that required silence and honesty when he stopped. He put the pen down. He thought about the letter from a junior Marshall Plan administrator to a colleague in Paris, dated 1948, that he'd quoted in the 2nd chapter. The letter was about fear, mostly. The fear that what they were building would not hold, that the architecture would be sound, but the people living inside it would not know how to inhabit the new shape. The administrator had written, "What I find I cannot do is wait for certainty before commitment. The certainty only comes from the commitment. You build it, and then you know if it will hold." Danny read this in his own memory, sitting at his kitchen table on a Sunday with a red pen in hand. He picked his phone up. He found Billy's number. They'd exchanged numbers 3 weeks ago under the practical pretense of Billy texting Danny when there was a special order of single origin he thought he'd like, and typed, "Are you free Thursday after your shift?" He stared at it, sent it. The response came 12 minutes later, which was long enough that Danny had made coffee, drunk half of it, and started editing again as a self-control exercise. "Yeah, off at noon. Why?" Danny typed, "I want to take you to lunch. Not here, somewhere else." Another pause, shorter this time. Somewhere else like a date? He felt the question like cold air. Here it was, the threshold. "Yeah," he typed. "Like a date, if you want." The pause this time was 15 seconds. I want. Danny sat with his phone and felt something in his chest rearrange itself permanently, the way furniture rearranges a room. Same room, different shape, and you understand the room better for the change. Yeah, he typed back. Good. He spent an embarrassing portion of Tuesday and Wednesday thinking about where to take him. It felt important to get right, not impressive, not performative, somewhere that fit the honest, specific quality of their conversations. He settled on a small Italian place on Garfield Street that had existed for 30 years and not changed its menu in 15. His mother had taken him there on his college tour, and the thing he remembered was that it was the kind of place where people talked rather than performed talking. He arrived 5 minutes early and stood outside in the November cold, pretending he wasn't counting the seconds. Billy arrived at 12:15 in a dark green jacket, the same green as his apron, which Danny couldn't decide was intentional or just Billy being consistently Billy, and looked around the restaurant with the open, interested expression. He turned on everything. He found Danny in about 3 seconds. He smiled. It was the full version, the one that used his whole face, not just the courtesy expression he deployed for customers. "Hi," he said, sliding into the chair across from Danny. "Hi," Danny said. They looked at each other. Outside, the wind moved a pile of leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, the warm smell of garlic and bread and old wood settled around them. "I've walked past this place 100 times, Billy said, looking around. "I always thought it looked like a place where things happen." "Things?" Danny asked. "Decisions," Billy said. "Agreements, things that matter." He picked up the menu and looked at it. Good choices in a decision-making sense, not in a moral sense. Although possibly both. Danny was quiet for a moment, watching him read the menu. "Can I say something?" Billy looked up. "Yeah, I've been trying to find the right way to say this for a while." He paused. "I'm not good at performing things. Feelings, specifically. I tend to wait until I'm sure of something before I say it, and by then sometimes the moment has done something strange." He set his menu down. "But I'm sure of this. I like talking with you. I like the way you think about things. I've been looking forward to Thursdays in a way that I haven't looked forward to a regular part of a week since. I'm not sure since when." Billy watched him through this with the same steady openness. When Danny stopped talking, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what's funny," Billy said. "When I started that shift at Grounds for Something, I told myself I was going to be purely professional. Barista energy, that's it. I'd had a bad experience with someone over the summer and I wasn't going to be open like that again." He folded his hands on the table. "And then you came in and asked me whether I preferred cut or stained, and I thought, oh, that's going to be a problem." Danny felt warmth move through him, quiet and thorough, like sunlight entering a room through several windows at once. "Why a problem?" "Because you were genuinely curious," Billy said simply. "Not performing curiosity, actually curious. About a philosophical question about espresso at 8 in the morning." He paused. "I'm fairly easily undone by people who are genuinely curious." "I'll keep that in mind," Danny said. "Please do," Billy said, and smiled at his menu. They ordered. The food arrived and was as good as Danny had remembered. They talked about the quartet, which Billy was now calling Threshold, about the thesis chapter Danny had sent to his advisor that morning, about a documentary Billy had been watching on post-war urban planning that intersected with Danny's research in ways that sent them into 20 animated minutes talking over their entrees. At some point, the restaurant had gotten quieter around them. The lunch rush had thinned. They'd been sitting there 2 hours, and neither had mentioned it. "I should probably let you have the rest of your afternoon," Danny said, and felt immediately that it was the wrong thing, too polite for the register they'd been in. "I don't have anything else today." Billy looked at him. "Do you?" "No." "Then why would you do that?" Billy said, not unkindly. That was a reflexive politeness. "You do that sometimes? I've noticed it at the shop. You're engaged, and then you back off." He waited. "Why?" "Because." Danny looked at the table, then back up. "I've been careful about this, about wanting things. I spend a lot of time making sure I understand why I want something before I let myself want it. My biology was supposed to tell me what to want. It doesn't." so I've had to be methodical about checking my own motivations. He held Billy's eyes. I wanted to be sure that what I felt about you was about you, not about something I was supposed to feel. Billy was quiet with the head tilt that meant he was thinking. And are you sure? He asked. Yes. You think carefully about things and then say them simply. You find everything interesting. You read Merleau-Ponty on slow Thursdays because you followed a footnote. He paused. I know why I want this. It's specific. Billy's expression shifted into something quieter and less guarded. I'm an omega with a bad track record. Not terrible, just people have wanted the designation before they've wanted me. I've gotten pretty good at telling the difference. He unfolded his hands. You look at me like I'm a person first, every time. You are a person first. I know, but not everyone acts like they know it. His eyes were steady. You do. The afternoon light had gone from gold to low amber. So, Danny said, his voice somewhat less steady than usual, what happens now? Billy stood, picked up his jacket, his eyes were warm and faintly amused. We go for a walk. It's the first day in a week, it isn't trying to snow. That's not what I meant, I know, but I like making you say things explicitly. Danny got his jacket. You're going to be very difficult. Probably, Billy agreed, without a trace of apology. They went for a walk. The walk lasted 90 minutes. It covered the east side of campus, 2 parks, 1 detour because Billy wanted to examine the carved stonework on a building from 1907, and arrived eventually at the river path along the south edge of campus. The river in November was low and dark. They walked side by side, close because the path was narrow and the wind came off the water in cold gusts. At some point, their hands were close enough that their knuckles brushed. Then, a few steps later, Danny's hand turned and Billy's fingers found the space between his and that was it. That simple, that easy. Danny felt like an idiot for all the time he'd spent being careful. Okay, Billy said quietly. Just that. The word as affirmation. Yeah, Danny said. The sun had fully gone, and the street lamps were coming on, reflecting in the dark water. The quartet, Danny said. Threshold. What's on the other side? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Billy looked at the river. Not a resolution. A continuation. You've crossed a line and the crossing is permanent even if where you are doesn't look different immediately. Danny thought about the letter from 1948. You build it and then you know if it will hold. I think that's right, he said. They made it back to the east gate as the temperature dropped another degree and their breath started making small clouds. Danny turned to face Billy, who was looking up at him with the amber glow of a street lamp doing something extremely unfair to the angles of his face. I meant it, Danny said, about wanting this specifically. Billy squeezed his hand once. I know, I just wanted to say it again. Outside of the restaurant. In the cold. To make it clear, it wasn't a warm room making me say things. Billy's mouth did the curve, full and unguarded. Danny Moran, you are genuinely one of a kind. Is that good? It is, Billy said, unreservedly. Danny looked at him in the lamplight and wanted very badly to kiss him and was trying to determine if that was a thing that should happen right now on a public street corner, and Billy, watching his face with that uncanny precision, clearly read approximately all of this. It's a first date, Billy said. I know, so you should see me home. I know, and we should plan the second one. I was going to suggest Saturday, Danny said. There's a concert at the music hall, contemporary string quartet. I thought you might like it. Billy's expression shifted into something bright and real and entirely unguarded. Did you look that up specifically? There might have been some research involved. Danny. Billy tugged his hand lightly. That's very sweet. Please don't tell Marcus I'm sweet. He'll be insufferable. I'm going to tell Marcus everything, Billy said serenely, and started walking. The concert was at Hartley Music Hall. Danny had researched the acoustics, terrible in the second balcony, extraordinary in the lower center section, and got seats accordingly, which Billy noticed with that particular brightness. The program was 3 contemporary pieces and 1 classical, Bartok, which Billy leaned over during the program notes to say he loved in a quiet voice Danny felt on the side of his face. During the second piece, haunting and spare, their shoulders pressed together in the narrow seats, and Danny could feel the slight tension in Billy's posture. The stillness of a musician listening to something they love, absorbing it through skin and bones and held breath. During intermission, Billy talked about the second piece with such precision that the couple in front of them turned around to listen. Danny watched him talk and felt the sustained, uncomplicated conviction that there was nowhere else he wanted to be. After the concert, they walked to a late bakery, got coffee and something absurdly sugary, and talked until the staff started stacking chairs. On the walk back to Billy's apartment, Danny held his hand again because he'd done it Thursday, and it was the right thing. And at the door of the building, Billy turned and looked up at him, and Danny kissed him. It was brief, unhurried, warm, specific. Billy's hand came up to Danny's jacket and held it lightly, not pulling him closer, just holding. Like being sure of something. When they separated, Billy looked at him with eyes that were very warm and a little undone, and said nothing for a moment. "Good second date," he said finally. "Yeah," Danny said. "You can come up." A pause. "I'm not saying that because I think you expect it. I'm saying it because I want to show you the scores for Threshold. I've got the sketches on the table." Danny felt warmth and amusement arrive simultaneously. "You want to show me the scores?" "I genuinely do." Billy's mouth curved. "And I also want you to come up." "Both things are true." They went up. The apartment was extremely small, but had 2 large windows and a digital piano against one wall and music paper everywhere. On the table, the piano bench, held to the wall with masking tape. It looked like the inside of a very organized mind working through something complicated. "It's a controlled chaos," Billy said. "It looks like thinking," Danny said. Billy looked at him with the warm expression Danny was starting to understand was specific to him. Not deployed for anyone, not social currency. "Yeah," he said. "It is." He showed Danny the scores. Danny, who knew music theory only in the approximate way of someone who had taken one course as an elective and retained the shape of it without the fluency, could not read all of it. But he could see the quality of Billy's thinking in the notation, the places where he'd erased and rewritten the margin notes in tiny handwriting, the occasional exclamation mark next to a passage that had apparently surprised him. "This section here," Danny said, pointing to a dense passage in the second movement. "This is the inside-the-moment thing? The grief that wants to be something else?" Billy leaned over the table next to him to see, close enough that Danny could feel the warmth of him. "That's the place I've been stuck," he said. "It wants to expand there, and I keep pulling it back because I don't know where it wants to go." "What if you let it go?" Billy was quiet. "In your materials on the phenomenology, Merleau-Ponty says you can't understand the felt thing by constraining it. You have to let the body move through it before the mind can describe it." He looked at the notation. "What if the score wants to go where it goes, and you follow it there and then you figure out what it is?" Billy straightened. He looked at the score, then at Danny. "I've been thinking about this the wrong way," he said slowly. "I've been trying to compose what I know the feeling is, but the composition is how I know the feeling." "The certainty comes from the commitment," Danny said. Billy looked at him. "What?" "Something I read. In my research." He met Billy's eyes. "You have to build it before you know if it will hold." Billy stood at his table in the lamplight of his small apartment with music paper everywhere and his eyes very bright, and said nothing for a moment. "You're going to quote Marshall Plan documentation at me when I'm talking about music," he said. "Apparently. I find that extremely." He stopped, looked for the word, "characteristic of you." "Is that good?" Billy stepped close, put his hand on Danny's chest over his jacket, and kissed him again. Longer this time, less brief, more thorough. Danny put his arms around him and felt the particular reality of it, the warmth of Billy's body, the way he tilted up slightly on instinct, the steady pressure of his hands. When they separated this time, the space between them was small and warm and felt like an interior. "It's good," Billy said, unreservedly. 4 months later, in the gray of March, Danny had a bad week. Not catastrophic, just the accumulation of things. The thesis chapter his advisor sent back with extensive notes. The bookstore's inventory system crashing during his shift. The call from home where his father deployed the word disappointing approximately 4 times. The general leaden quality of a season ending too slowly. He showed up at Grounds for Something on Thursday at 8 and sat at the corner table and stared at his files without opening them. Billy brought his coffee and didn't say anything. He set it down and went back behind the counter. And Danny appreciated this. The understanding that sometimes the thing a person needs is not to be asked what's wrong, but to be left alone in a place where someone knows them. The morning rush happened around him. He opened one file, closed it, opened his laptop, closed that too. At 10, the rush had faded. Billy came out with his own coffee and sat across from Danny and looked at him. "Bad week," Danny said. "Yeah." "Not a question. Do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to tell you something interesting?" Danny looked at him. "Something interesting." "Okay." Billy wrapped both hands around his cup. "So you know how I told you the second movement was unsticking? I worked on it last night for 3 hours, and I think I found where it wants to go." "Yeah?" "It wants to go into the third movement without resolving. Not an attacca exactly, more like a seam. Like it's the same fabric, but you can feel where the two pieces joined." He was animated in the way he got when he was talking about the quartet, hands moving slightly, words coming with the particular precision of someone translating something complex accurately. It changes what the third movement is. The third movement isn't aftermath anymore. It's continuation. The grief doesn't become something else. It grows something else inside itself. Danny looked at him across the table. The leaden weight of the week was still there, but it had shifted, made room. "The grief grows something inside itself," he repeated. "Yeah." Billy's eyes were warm. "I know it sounds abstract." "No." Danny thought about the advisor's notes with their extensive marginalia. Thought about his father's voice on the phone. Thought about how both of those felt right now, under the leaden weight, and then thought about what else was under there. "No, it makes a lot of sense." Billy watched him. "What are you thinking?" "That you're good for me," Danny said. Not as a compliment, exactly, more like an observation, the simple factual statement of a thing he'd established and wanted to say aloud. Not in the way that implies you make things easier, in the way that implies you make things truer. Billy was quiet. Something in his expression went still and deep, the way still water is deep. "I think about you a lot," Billy said, "outside of when I'm with you." He said it simply, as he said most things. "I was writing something last week and I thought, I have to tell Danny this, before I'd finished thinking the thing. It happened automatically." "What were you writing?" "A letter to my old music teacher. About threshold." He paused. "About how I found what it was supposed to be." Danny held his eyes. Outside the window, slush ran off the overhang in a thin stream. The coffee shop was quiet around them, the lull of mid-morning when the regular world was at its regular work. "You make me brave," Billy said, "about the music, about saying the true thing instead of the safe thing." He looked at his cup, then back up. "I've spent a long time making myself smaller so people didn't feel crowded by what I am, how I feel things. I tend to feel things very specifically and very completely, and some people find that." A pause. "Intense." "I know," Danny said. "I noticed it the first week. You apologized once for being interested in something." Billy looked surprised. "Did I?" "You were talking about the bar talk and you said, 'Sorry, I know this is a lot,' and then you stopped talking. And I didn't say anything at the time because I was still figuring things out, but I thought, no, that's the wrong response to this. The right response is to ask more questions." Billy was very still across the table. "You don't have to be smaller," Danny said. "I don't find you crowded by. I find you." He stopped, found the word. "Specific, in the best way. Unmistakably yourself." A long, quiet moment. "That's a very Danny way of saying something very lovely," Billy said, and his voice was slightly different than usual. Lower, unguarded in a way he didn't usually show, even with Danny. "I'm working on saying things," Danny said. "I'm getting better at it." You're very good at it, Billy said. You just do it like you mean it, which some people find strange. Do you find it strange? No, Billy said. I find it exactly right. March gave way to April with genuine reluctance, and then all at once, the way seasons sometimes do, slow release and then sudden bloom. The campus going from mud to green in what felt like a single weekend. Billy finished Threshold in mid-April. He'd been working on the final measures of the fourth movement for a week, the continuation, not resolution section. And Danny had come over on a Thursday evening to find him at the piano playing through the same 8 bars over and over with minute variations each time, the focused intensity of a person very close to something. Danny had made tea in the small kitchen and sat on the floor with his back against the sofa and his thesis notes spread around him and worked in companionable parallel while Billy worked. And it was the kind of evening that felt significant for how unsignificant it felt. Just 2 people in a small room being themselves in the same space, the piano and the scratch of a pen, the quiet. At 9:30, Billy played the final passage through once, paused, played it again, then stopped. That's it, he said. Danny looked up. Billy was sitting at the piano with his hands in his lap, looking at the keys. Done? Danny said. Done. He didn't sound elated, he sounded quiet, looked quiet. The particular stillness of completion. 4 movements, 22 minutes. Danny got up. He went to the piano and stood behind Billy and put his hands on Billy's shoulders, not speaking, just present. Billy's head dropped back slightly, the weight of it easy and deliberate. How do you feel? Danny asked. Strange, Billy said, like standing outside a place you've lived in for a long time. He paused. Not sad, just aware of the space that's been there. Danny pressed his thumbs gently into the tension at the base of Billy's neck and felt him exhale. Will you play it for me? The whole thing? Now? If you want, if you're ready. Billy thought about this for a moment. Then he straightened, set his hands on the keys. It's written for string quartet, he said. The piano reduction doesn't do everything it should. But I'm listening, Danny said, and moved to the sofa. Billy played Threshold from beginning to end without stopping. It lasted, on piano, 17 minutes. It was not background music. It was too specific and too demanding for that. The kind of music that required your full attention, not as an imposition, but as a need. Like a conversation that asked you to be entirely present. Danny sat on the sofa and listened without moving. The first movement was sparse, almost cautious, as if it were learning the shape of something by moving around its edges rather than through it. The second movement was where the grief was, and it was. It was not what Danny had expected, though he hadn't quite known what he was expecting. It wasn't melodramatic, it was too specific for that. It had the texture of something true, which meant it was uncomfortable in the way true things are. Not painfully uncomfortable, but real. The kind of real that makes you breathe differently. And then, at the seam Billy had described, the place where the second movement passed into the third without resolving, something changed in the music. Grew, not into something different, but into something more. The grief, still the grief, but with something growing inside it, something that was not the opposite of grief, but was undeniably alive in the same space. The fourth movement was the continuation. The threshold crossed, but not left behind. When the final passage ended, Billy held the last chord until it decayed to silence. Danny didn't say anything for a moment. Billy, he said. Billy turned on the bench. His expression was open and waiting, not anxious, but unguarded in the way he got when something mattered. That's extraordinary, Danny said. He meant it as precisely as he said it. Not as encouragement or support, as assessment. That's the truest piece of music I've heard in my life. Billy exhaled. Something in his shoulders released that Danny hadn't realized was held. Yeah? The second to third movement seam, the grief growing something inside itself. Danny leaned forward. You did it. Exactly what you said. You captured the ambiguity without lying about it. Billy looked at him with very warm eyes. You understood it. I've been listening to you work on it for 4 months. No. I mean, you understood what it was saying. He paused. Not everyone will. The right people will, Danny said. The ones who've been inside a moment they couldn't name yet. Billy looked at him steadily. That's what this is, he said. And it was not entirely clear whether he meant the music or something else, but Danny thought both, and thought yes. It was Marcus who said it, in May, at the end-of-year gathering at someone's apartment. Danny was on the balcony, needing 10 minutes of cold air, and Marcus materialized beside him with characteristic precision. "You look stupidly happy," Marcus said. "Thank you. You used to look competent and thoughtful. Now you look competent and thoughtful and stupidly happy, which is considerably more expression than I was used to." "I told him I loved him last week," Danny said. "And?" he said finally, and then said it back. He'd been waiting to see if I'd say it first because he didn't want to overwhelm me. "Danny, that man has been catastrophically in love with you since the third Thursday." A pause. "You had your research files upside down for 10 minutes the day he told you cut not stained." Danny stopped. "I didn't notice that." "I know, because you were completely gone." Marcus sounded extremely satisfied. "You know what you are? A 93rd percentile alpha who can't smell omega pheromones. Which means when you fell for someone, it was for all the reasons that actually matter, not anything they produce that you can't even detect." He leaned on the railing. "You didn't fall for an omega. You fell for Billy Tucker specifically. That's the most accurate possible version of the thing." "I know," Danny said, "but hearing you say it is," he found the word. "Good. G. Then he went back inside, found Billy in the kitchen talking about a Shostakovich recording, and stood next to him, and Billy's hand found his without looking. Automatic, easy, certain. The way hands find what they know. Finals passed. The thesis chapter was accepted with minor revisions. Threshold was submitted for the University Composition Prize and was shortlisted. Billy's summer job was at a music camp an hour north, teaching children between the ages of 8 and 12 the beginning shapes of violin and cello, which he described as 40 minutes of chaos followed by 20 minutes of genuine magic, repeated 6 times a day. Danny missed him in the mornings especially. He texted, at odd hours, a photo of a particularly dedicated 8-year-old's first complete scale, a note about something a kid had said that had made him laugh so hard he'd had to sit down, a voice memo once at 11 at night where he talked for 6 minutes about the philosophical implications of a piece a 14-year-old had composed that had moved him genuinely. Danny listened to the voice memo 3 times and saved it. They saw each other on weekends when Billy had them free. Danny drove up twice, Billy came down twice. The drives became time Danny looked forward to for their own quality, the particular kind of thinking that happened with movement, the way a long drive settled things in the mind, the way sleep settles the body. On one of these drives back to campus, Billy asleep in the passenger seat with his cheek against the window and the evening light coming through the glass in gold stripes across his face, Danny thought about the letter again, the administrator from 1948, writing about fear. The certainty only comes from the commitment. You build it and then you know if it will hold. He glanced at Billy, who was sleeping with the particular unguarded softness of a person who felt safe where they were. It holds, Danny thought. Definitively, it holds. Billy stirred slightly, didn't wake. His hand moved across the center console and found Danny's arm in sleep, settled there, still. Danny kept his eyes on the road and drove them home. September arrived, and with it, the new academic year, and Danny's final year of the thesis, and Billy's 3rd year of the composition program. And the coffee shop on Birch and Aldermast, with its mismatched chairs and its ornate chalkboard menu and its corner table by the window. Billy was not behind the counter anymore. He'd gotten a research assistantship that paid better and fit his schedule more neatly. And Grounds for Something had a new face in the green apron whose name was Tam and who made excellent cortados, but who Danny regarded with the cheerful acknowledgement of someone who understood very precisely what a particular chapter of life looked like. Danny went anyway, most Thursdays. Old habit, old table. He brought his files, and wrote, And sometimes Billy came and met him after his seminar, and they sat in the corner and talked. And sometimes Billy texted that he was stuck in the composition lab, and Danny stayed and worked alone and thought about a year ago, standing at that counter, watching someone's hands move over an espresso machine with focused efficiency. One Thursday in October, a year to the approximate week, Danny was at the corner table when the door opened with the sound of the bell, and Billy came in still wearing his coat, unwinding his scarf. Looking around the shop with the open immediate interest he brought to rooms, and found Danny in the usual spot and smiled the full-face version. He got a coffee at the counter and slid into the chair across from Danny and set the cup down between them. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Danny said. They looked at each other in the October morning light. "Weird to be on this side of the counter," Billy said, looking at the bar. "Is it?" "A little." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "I met you from over there." "I know." Danny looked at him. "Do you remember what you said when I first came in?" Billy thought. The head tilt. "I asked what you wanted. Before that, to the person ahead of me. About the cortado and the macchiato." A pause. Then Billy's mouth curved. "The names. Cut and stained. Yeah." Billy was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know that conversation was going to matter," he said. "When I was having it, it was just a conversation. A nice one. But just. I know. When did you know it was going to matter?" Danny thought about this honestly, in the way he thought about most things, methodically and without shortcuts. "When you said cut and not stained," he said, "and meant it. And then you handed me my coffee and said something can be both, permanent and changing." He met Billy's eyes. "I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I knew something was different." Billy looked at him. Brown eyes warm, the light from the window falling across the table between them. "Same," Billy said. "For what it's worth, I knew something was different." A pause. "I told my roommate that night that there was a customer who was going to be a problem." "A problem?" Danny repeated. "A wonderful, ongoing, completely undeniable problem." "And?" Billy's smile was full and unguarded. "Still true," he said. Danny looked at him across the corner table of the coffee shop on Birch and Aldermast, in the particular gold light of an October morning, 1 year after the first time. Billy Tucker, who had walked into his life through a glass door with a green apron and strong opinions about the semantics of espresso, who had written a string quartet about grief that grew something inside itself. Who made him brave by being brave, who had said finally with his whole heart, and then said, "I love you back," with the same simple certainty that had characterized everything from the beginning. He was, Danny thought, exactly the kind of problem worth having. "You know," Danny said, "I'm going to quote the Marshall Plan at you for the rest of my life." "I'm aware," Billy said. "I've made my peace with it. And you're going to play me music at 11 at night when you find something that makes you feel something. Obviously. And we're going to sit in this corner on Thursdays until they ask us to leave." "We've never been asked to leave. We've been very close twice." "Oh, fair," Billy said with no remorse whatsoever. Outside, the October sun was doing its particular low amber thing, and the leaves on the trees were the exact colors of the kind of day you remember for the rest of your life. Gold and red, and the very specific brown-green of a thing at the peak of itself before it changes. The shop was warm around them. The coffee was good. Billy reached across the table, and his hand covered Danny's, warm and specific and entirely certain. And that was it. That was the whole thing. Not a dramatic gesture or a grand statement. Just a hand on a hand, in the corner of a coffee shop, in October, between two people who had found each other by accident and kept each other on purpose. Danny turned his hand over and held on. Dr. Elise Hartman at the university clinic had explained it to Danny with patience and care. Selective anosmia, neurological anomaly, 93rd percentile, alpha who processed omega pheromones as neutral atmosphere. What she hadn't explained, because no one ever could, because it wasn't in any handbook, was what the immunity actually meant. It meant that Danny Moran had spent 23 years walking through a world of invisible signals without receiving a single one, without being pulled by chemical architecture toward any particular person. without having his biology shortcut the work of knowing someone. It had felt, at various points in his life, like a deficiency, a gap in the map. But here is what he understood now, in October, with Billy Tucker's hand warm in his. The immunity wasn't a gap. It was space. Space where, instead of pheromones, he had found specific things, the tilt of a head, and the word cut, and the texture of music in a small apartment at 9:30 at night. The hand flat on the table while thinking. The annotated sticky notes in library books. The voice memo at 11 about a teenager's composition that moved something in a grown man. The full-face smile across a coffee shop. All of it, every single piece of it, chosen, not by biology, by him. Danny Moran, alpha 93rd percentile immune to omega pheromones, had fallen completely and specifically and with full deliberate knowledge in love with Billy Tucker, a slightly shorter person in a dark green jacket with curling blonde hair and warm brown eyes who thought the milk cut the espresso, not just stained it, and who had been right about that all along. The cutting is permanent too. That's the part people forget. The milk passes through the espresso, and the espresso is different. The moment passes through you, and you are different. You cross the threshold, and the crossing is in you now, part of the architecture, part of what you are. Danny knew this with the certainty that came from the commitment. He'd built it. It held. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, make sure to join our Patreon. Link is in the description. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.